Welcome to the Live Up podcast, where we revisit the movies from our youth to see if they live up. I'm Jess Latterman.
And I'm Amanda Treat. Today we're reviewing a movie that I have not seen in over 35 years. And honestly, I was still kind of scared to watch it. From the mind of Jim Henson, it's 1982's The Dark Crystal. Jess, you picked this.
I did.
Did this movie freak you out as a kid? Because I am still scared of it.
Yeah, no, it did. It did. It just boils down to that vague fight or flight response emotion for me. That is all that I kind of remember about this movie. And I thought then it would be a good one to rewatch, just to scare the shit out of me and maybe out of my kids. But I do remember, like, it wasn't just that I remember watching it. I just remember it was one of those movies that universally everyone had watched and seen a ton, even though you and I were obviously only like toddlers when this came out.
Yeah.
No, but, and I should set the scene that I had this in mind, that I remembered the sort of abject terror of what this movie left me with as a kid. And was definitely a little nervous to sit down with my kids to watch it. I mean, given my track record of accidentally showing them our movies, like Coming to America, I was like, oh no, is this going to be another like Mom of the Year moment where I show them this movie and I scar them for life? So I was like, that's what I had in mind when I was sitting down to watch it. It did not necessarily pan out that way, but
that's good.
Yeah, but so my memories are more vague. They're just really vague, fight or flight. I just remember feeling scared. But it sounds like you have more specific memories of watching.
I mean, I think I only saw this once as a kid, and I remember exactly.
Only once?
Oh, wow. So. Yeah.
You were scarred right away.
I was. Yeah, no, this movie gave me nightmares. So I saw this when I was 5, which I would say is too young to be watching The Dark Crystal, maybe.
I watched it with my son. He just turned 6.
Okay. We'll get his review in a little bit.
Yeah, we will.
Growing up, I had this neighbor, Adam, who was my age, like we were in the same grade and everything. And everyone used to go play at each other's houses. And he was the kid who had all of the Star Wars action figures. He had like the Millennium Falcon play set. He had the like Ewok Forest play set. He had everything. It was like his room was like a toy store. It was just crazy in there. And of course, he had a VHS cassette of The Dark Crystal. And I remember watching it with him in his den. And we were both 5 years old. And I remember his mom had come in and said, you guys can watch this, but if his little sister Beth woke up from her nap, we would have to turn it off because she would freak out. And she was probably 2 or 3 years old. So we're sitting there watching it. And
I love that she drew the line at 2 or 3 and you guys are like 5.
Well, no, because Beth would like throw a temper tantrum if she walked in and that thing was playing. So that kind of built it up in my head too. Just like, oh God, what are we about to watch? And sitting there, it was terrifying. Like all I can remember is just very dark scenes and the main characters are running for their lives, screaming. And I was sitting on that couch next to Adam, who's loving the whole thing. And all I could think was like, oh, I wish Beth would wake up. Like, I wish she would come in so we have to turn it off.
Exit ramp.
Yeah, no, I needed that because, I could barely remember what this movie was about, but I remember the running and the screaming and the just, like you said, fight or flight, but like this gave me nightmares. There was so much like giant dark things that are trying to kill you in this movie, and it freaked me out. I think I thought about this way too long.
But it sounds like we had like similar things, and I wonder if that comes from how young we were for watching it. I mean, clearly you were 5, I was probably 5, but I think we watched it too when we were more like mid-kid age, all the way up to like 8 or 9 maybe.
I have friends who watched this when they were more like 10-year-olds, and they have really fond memories like, oh, it's so creative and like everything looks so cool, and it does. That's totally legit. But yeah, for a 5-year-old, my takeaway was like, this movie is trying to kill everything. Oh my God.
Yeah.
We're all gonna die because we watched this.
Pretty much. Yeah. And I had the same reaction, and I didn't remember any of the plot. coming in, like other than there was another world and a quest. But to that end, yes, I will. Let's if
Let's
we were
recap.
5 when you and don't remember this movie, or maybe even when you're 10, because I don't remember some plots of movies when I was 10. So, all right. So everyone who hasn't seen it in decades, Dark Crystal is this fantasy movie from 1982, created by Jim Henson, but it is not your typical Muppet puppet movie.
Not zany. It is not funny. It is not slapsticky. It is not the Muppets.
It is not the Muppets. That's a great way to put it. It is Jim Henson, but hold the Muppets, basically. So it can be summed up as a weird quest movie with lots of like humming and ums and ahs and chanting. Jen is a Gelfling who has to find a shard of the Dark Crystal and end the 1,000-year rule of the bad guy Skeksis. And that's basically the plot. And so in other words, it's like a watered down Lord of the Rings is how I could sum it up, with some lesser Yoders in there and who have mentored Jen, and like Jen, who's like an Atreyu like hero, basically. So if you've asked me what this was about before I rewatched it, like I said before, I think that it would just be the sounds of it, of the humming and the chanting, just trigger abject fear. That would be my 5-year-old summary, I think. But yeah, otherwise, it's a watered down Lord of the Rings. Did you pick up on that it was like darker than most kids' movies?
Yeah, no, it felt like we probably shouldn't be watching it, frankly. But
yeah, I mean, mainly like, what the fuck, Jim Henson?
Yeah. No, just like it's literally dark from the first shot of this movie. It's like those scenes of the dragons fighting that nobody could see in Game of Thrones, and everyone got all upset about it. Like that's the tone of this movie, the color of this movie.
With less CGI.
Yeah, you can barely see it. So yeah, from the beginning, everything's black, purple. You've got Trevor Jones doing the soundtrack, who I knew him from The Last Mohicans because I really like that soundtrack.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, so he's a great composer, but his music here is super creepy. You're right. It like invokes just these bad memories of like, like I remember being scared to this sound. Yeah. But that said, the craft work, there is absolutely no CGI. That didn't exist back in 82. The landscapes, the Muppet puppet things, they're not Muppets.
And there's the garden too. I mean,
yeah.
Is it a garden? I don't know.
But it's beautiful. Even though it's like gross.
Yeah.
Like
beautiful.
Well, and we'll dive into all the characters, but like the Skeksis live in this kind of like a castle, but a fortress, I guess. But like the walls almost look wet and like slimy, and like there's just like rats running around, and it's all so just like creepy and dark. And yeah, you're really immediately in this world. And for me, you want to get out of it as soon as possible. I was counting the minutes like, oh, thank God this movie's only 90 minutes long.
I definitely had that thought throughout this movie. Like, thank God it's only 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I was actually even surprised to go back and see, like, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like 71% or something, with an even higher percent for audience score. And I kind of wonder, is that because of how old people were when they remember watching it? Is it a lot? I assume it's a lot of like current reviews that are looking back at it. That, obviously on the Live Up podcast, we're going to take down a notch.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's got that cult following, and people really love the, like, not mystery of it, but it's like a good myth, I guess. And just I admired the craft work. I love my practical effects, and like they're doing all of this for real. There's people in these costumes. There's people manually moving everything around the scene. It's cool looking.
It is cool looking. I mean, I appreciated that too. So, I mean, the craft work, the non-CGI it's not just charming. It's just really well done. I mean, it's well done. I think even just, obviously I mentioned I'd watch with my kids who are now 6 and 11. I mean, I don't think that mattered at all to them, whether it was fancy CGI like they could see in Marvel movies or Star Wars, or this. I mean, it almost was more realistic.
Yeah.
In a way, it had more texture. So, and the camouflage is better in like the jungle area. I realize like we're not even talking about the plot because who gives a shit about it right now. But but yeah, so
I
But
would
yeah,
even say, like, the moment they go into Kira's realm and she's all talking to the animals, and that's when we keep saying jungle, that's sort of where she lives. But there's things just going on in the front ground, in the background, that I would argue look way more imaginative than the stuff you see in Avatar. Like,
yeah, I
the
agree.
Henson Company is just piled on these weird creatures and weird looking plants, and they're all different colors, they're moving, they're like reacting to the other characters in a way you're not expecting. It's really cool looking. So definitely like props for that. It looks awesome.
It does look awesome. And I think it does add to the idea of the world, right? Like you're really in this world, which is probably why it was so terrifying to us as 5 or 6 year olds watching this movie, because you really just you go right into that world. It looks real, and so it's intense, and it looks real in the way that like Star Wars looks real or feels real when you're watching the movie. There's the look of it, and then there's
Yeah.
what that world is. And
Yeah.
do we give a shit about that world?
It's definitely the first kids movie I ever saw that is touching on genocide. That topic had not come up in any of the other movies I'd seen up until that
Yeah, I
point
wonder
at age
why. I mean,
5.
I don't know.
Like,
Seems
even
fine.
Star Wars, they're not trying to, like, kill all of the Ewoks. Well, actually, this movie came out before that, but yeah.
That's true. That's true.
This is a movie with legit genocide in it.
It is for kids.
Yay!
Yay! This is where I was like really looking forward to getting into this with you, where I think, let's say, our opinions as adults will potentially diverge from the kids we once were in the 80s and 90s and kids today. So it looks amazing, but it's like a kids movie about genocide, and it's essentially a watered down Lord of the Rings. I mean, I even thought it was a watered down never like Lord, that almost puts it too high. And then I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a watered down never ending story. Nope, too high. Then I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. It's a watered down Rudolph the red-nosed fucking reindeer.
Whoa, we went there. Ooh.
I did go there.
Ooh.
And I was like, it's even like has a watered down Yukon Cornelius. I was like, no. So that's what I was thinking as I was like, how long is this movie? And how long do I have to sit through this with my kids? But I got to tell you, my kids were in from the first frame. I mean,
Okay.
they loved it. They were 100% in. They were silent, eyes glued. They were immediately in that world. And that's
Wow.
where I think like it doesn't matter whether it's CGI or the puppetry or all that other stuff. I mean, they were explaining the plot to me. They were like, whoever breaks the stone wins. And this is when, the emperor dies of the bad guys, and Skeksil is, I don't know, they have to like, I honestly, it doesn't even matter. They're like breaking a stone with an axe, and my son is like, whoever breaks the stone wins, mama. Like he was so into it. And then he was like, oh, those are bad spider crabs, like whatever the hell those are, the terrifying
Oh,
creatures.
I hate those things.
And there was even a moment where, so we're watching this movie, we're like halfway through. I'm still having these feelings of like abject fear from just being triggered by all of the terrible things happening in the movie. And my wife came home from like a workout class she was doing, and she opens the door and she starts talking to us. And my kids were like, can you be quiet? Like they were just like,
hey,
I don't want you to talk. They're so into it. All that to say is that in terms of the world building, it wasn't just the effects. I mean, and maybe as an adult now, it seems like a watered down Lord of the Rings and terrible, but my kids were in, man. They were in.
wow, okay.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Hey, good for them. They are braver than I was at age 5.
Maybe
They weren't waiting for the 3-year-old to wake up from her nap and have a temper tantrum so they could shut it off.
I mean, I guess like my daughter is 11 now, so maybe it wouldn't scare her. But Isaac's he just turned 6, so maybe if
Yeah.
I show it to him 10 more times, he'll also be scarred. So yeah, so I just think that's interesting because I think it's the first time in our podcast where things I think have really diverged between whether kids really would really still like it versus maybe adults. But we can get into maybe we liked some
Yeah,
parts.
we'll see.
We'll see. I guess we should get into the characters then. Now that we've like completely covered, I guess, the plot.
Break a stone. There's a genocide and plot.
And kids love it. Kids love the genocide.
Oh my god.
But let's talk about our hero. So who's our hero, Treat?
All right. So we've got Jen, who is the last Gelfling because of the
Like whatever
genocide
the fuck
against
that
the
is.
Gelflings. He is the most human-ish character, a Muppety looking human. So we're following his journey as he's trying to find the shard and then return the shard to the stone. I just realized that in my notes, I was spelling shard like chard, like the vegetable,
like Swiss chard. Like,
yeah. So Jen's running around with a basket of chard.
He's just gonna try to have a salad.
He's looking for some kale.
Maybe don't get killed by all those really, really real looking puppet like creatures in the jungle.
Yeah, the goal is to make a quinoa salad at the end of this movie.
Very healthy.
Well, once he acquires the shard, he's questing to return it to the stone. For a hero, we get to hear his inner monologue a lot. Like I found
that to be confusing.
Yeah, so the narrative technique is to have him say his thoughts out loud, or he's not saying them, but like they're narrating it over it. And he really he doesn't want to go on this quest at all. And a lot of the times,
pretty
comes across a little whiny, if I'm frank. Like, I don't love him as the main character. He doesn't seem, he's not even like oh God, we're going very Lord of the Rings here, but like, you don't have him like, oh, but I have to leave the Shire, and how can a little old me save the world? Like, he's not even doing that. He's just like complaining. So
yeah,
and he doesn't overcome his self-doubt at any point, really. He just goes and does it. He's fine. He is not my favorite hero of any fantasy movie I've seen. So
no, I don't even think he's like my second, third, fourth favorite hero of. Yeah, I felt the same way. I thought I did think it was somewhat confusing. This is where sometimes my kids would like actually fill in the plot for me, because I was like, what is going on? And my kids were like, yes, do it. Like, they really were following along. They just filled in the holes. It didn't bother them, that technique of hearing his thoughts or that he was whiny. I guess I overall thought he was a downer, which I guess is similar to what you're saying. He had like the weirdest bar conversation ever. I don't know. It looked like they were in a bar when he and like the other Gelfling that he finds along the way, Kira. It looks like they're in a bar.
They kind of are in a tavern-ish environment.
Yeah, and somewhere in this bar conversation, like all the family trauma comes up, and it's like yada yada yada, chosen one energy, and then my master died, and I'm like, wow, what a downer. Like,
I just like the idea that there's like a Gelfling bar out there.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember him as a kid. Like, do you remember like being I guess if you haven't seen it as much, but do you remember being attached to him as a hero? Like, how much of him do you remember?
I think as a kid, like literally the only thing I remember is him and Kira running for their lives out of where the podlings are.
The podlings who look like busted Ewoks. Yeah.
They look like a sack of potatoes. Podlings. I mean, adorably so, but like they're literally just like potatoes
delicious.
with a face drawn on them. Like,
maybe that's why the Skeksis are all like,
oh, delicious podlings. Tastes like potato. You can put butter on them.
Butter and fries.
Bacon bits, chives. Delicious podlings. I just remember, I don't remember anything about personality or likability. I just remember them running for their lives out of that dark place into another dark place, a darker, wetter place. I don't know. It gets,
he's like in the fight or flight, like type of response that I felt, that I, by the way, had still throughout this movie watching as like a 42-year-old. He was like the face of my fight or flight from my 5-year-old memory. It's almost, I swear to God, it's almost a core memory now.
See, I don't even think I was focused on him or Kira. They do look like humans as they're running for their lives.
Yeah.
But what just stuck with me was those garthim beetle, crabby, giant things bursting through the walls at any given moment. Oh my God, the idea that you could just be sitting there and some giant thing that's trying to kill you just bust through the wall unexpectedly, that set me off as a kid. That was so scary.
So me too. I mean, I think I had even texted you this before I had sat down to watch it again, that my only memory, I remember shadowy figures and abject terror. And when I watched again, hearing them coming and the fact that you don't really see them until they burst through the wall.
Yeah.
And by the way, dear listener, these are in various scenes when, you know, the Gelflings are on their quest and the Skeksis are sending these evil spider crabs out to
And they're
basically round up.
huge. They're so much bigger than
Huge.
the podling potatoes, and they're so much bigger than Jen and Kira. Yeah, they take up a whole wall when they come busting through. I don't think the Kool-Aid Man was a thing yet when this movie came
Oh
out.
my
So
God.
like it wasn't officially funny to
Oh my
watch
God.
things burst through the wall. So this was just scary.
Yeah, not to
Ugh.
overuse Lord of the Rings, but they're sort of like orcs. I mean, but scary.
But they look like, yeah, black crabs. And they got those giant claws that almost look like swords.
I don't know if you can hear it, but my daughter just whispered through the door, cockroaches.
Oh, they look like cockroaches. Good call.
Good call.
Good call,
Good call,
Lily.
Lily. She could be a guest. Just hearing them coming, even watching it again, as like, I mean, we're talking like 30 plus years later. I was like, I still had the fight or flight. I was like, this is still terrifying.
I'm looking over my shoulder right now. Oh my God, what could come through the wall behind me?
Yeah. And like, I have this all over my notes, but there's various parts where it's just sort of weirdly triggering. It just, these sounds and vague sights, even if they're part of the plot, but that's not the main point of the movie. That's what elicits more emotion away from me.
Yeah, no, I mean the suspense of it, and then they come in like a wrecking ball. Like they're knocking things down, they're scooping people up, they're killing things.
They're like
ah!
Yeah, and then a character that I think, you know, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I think she's a good guy, but sort of Agra. Is that
Agra? When she first shows up, you just see a hand holding an eyeball. It was just like, what the hell? Oh my God. And that's a good guy? Like, ooh.
My son was like, that's disgusting.
Just pops eyeballs out of her head and throws them around. Oof,
yeah.
Oof. But is actually a good guy.
Right. I vaguely remembered her. I think I liked her more as an adult. She was more memorable to me in a viewing as an adult. And just for those who don't remember who she is, who is she? I mean, can you tell me, Amanda? Because I'm still not sure. What is her role?
I mean, she is kind of an oracle, but like,
yeah, oracle.
She makes a comment about how she came into being the last time the suns aligned. There's these 3 suns that align, and you can only return the crystal, the shard and the kale and the quinoa to the crystal. But that she appeared the last time it happened 1,000 years ago, and that said she's gonna disappear when it happens again. So she's on a clock here because the suns are about to align again. They got to fix the crystal. But I think it's not like she dies, but like she's gone after that happens.
I didn't pick up on that piece of the plot arc. I mean, I also thought of her as like, she's sort of the oracle. She's sort of, you know, helping them along the way in terms of, you know, trying to tell Jen that what he needs to do and that and exactly why he's on this quest. Although honestly, the way I'm explaining it feels more clear than in the movie.
Do you want to just call her Gandalf? She's the Gandalf.
I mean, let's just keep going with watered down Lord of the Rings. I mean, essentially, yeah, she's like kind of Gandalf, but with some prophecy thrown in there and
detachable eyeballs.
And detachable eyeballs, you know, just because that's fun. She was like this old lady to me at the end where like she's probably still putzing around that world somewhere, like, you know, sitting at the diner, like hoarding sugar in her purse. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, she's the comic relief in a way, and she's not that funny, but
no, not really.
But she's the most Muppety of all the characters in this.
She is probably the closest to Muppet. And she saves the dog at the end. So I mean, there's like that key, you know, the key last scene where of course Kira and Jen are in the evil castle with the Skeksis, and they have the shard, and oh my God, the purple crystal, and da da da. And somehow the dog like just gets unceremoniously like thrown into like some sort of dark crystal lava pit. And I was like, oh my fucking God, they just killed the dog. Algra saves it at the end. And so I'm kind of like, girl, you're the best. You saved the dog.
When that happened, I was like, this movie absolutely would kill the dog. Like this is
wait, it's not even a dog.
This is gonna be like a John Wick. It's Kira's pet, and I think she describes it as a friendly monster at one point, but
Well,
It just looks
it
like a
actually is kinda
spazzy
cute.
Muppet.
So, as an adult, Agra was kind of my favorite character, and I have to say the dog was sort of my second favorite character.
Yeah, the dog adds some lightness in
Yeah,
a movie
I
that's
liked the
very
friendly
dark.
monster. Yeah. I do not remember the friendly monster from when I was a kid, but I liked him.
Yeah.
So what about Kira? We keep bringing her up, but she's sort of the other
Yeah.
girlfriend.
So she pops up halfway through this movie, and all of a sudden we realize, wait, there's a second Gelfling, and like, oh, it's kind of a love interest, but we're busy returning the shard.
And they
Um,
can weirdly like see each other's thoughts.
yeah, I feel
The
like
Gelflings.
Avatar completely ripped that off too. Like, just plug into the tree.
Right. Yeah. But they could like plug into each other, but it's not sexual.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe a little.
Maybe.
They're
I don't
supposed to be
know.
young, so
That's a different podcast.
Gelflings After Dark. The podcast.
I mean, could you even go more after dark than the Dark Crystal?
It's
I'm
pretty
not
dark.
sure.
You're right. I like her. She is put in there a little bit as the exposition person. I mean, a lot of the characters in this movie are exposition characters. They're just telling you how it is. But she's cool because she's got a number of skills that, like, she can talk to the animals. She kills that
that's
bat
true.
that's trying to spy on them. Like, she knows how to like swing. What do you call that when it's a bunch of rocks attached to a rope?
A lasso?
She takes out a bat in the middle of the air, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that's true. She has wings herself too, which is I guess
yeah.
cool.
She's got my favorite line in the movie. She's running around with Jen. They both kind of look like humans, but then at a critical moment, she suddenly has wings and they don't fall to their death. She kind of like hang glides them down and then just turns to him because he looks shocked, like, you have wings? And she's like, yeah, you don't because you're a boy. And then they just walk off. But it's very nonchalant, like, well, you don't, you're a guy. Like,
yeah, not special.
You don't have these
special
skills.
girl wings. Yeah.
She's an interesting character. Like, they do her whole flashback. Her mom kind of shoved her into a nook of a tree as they were getting massacred. And
again, genocide for kids. Yeah.
She's a cool, definitely useful character. And it's definitely implied she's the love interest. We're going to get into the bad guys and everything they do, but they catch her at one point and they're about to drain her life energy out, which is just creepy. So, like, it's so much
dark.
worse somehow than, like, in The Princess Bride, they have that machine that takes your life away, but somehow being strapped to a chair in this movie and they just like drip it out of you is just so much more visceral and gross.
It's still terrifying.
Yeah, it's still creepy to me. Like, no, you can't just.
That particular scene, though,
but they're doing it to the podlings, and they're already potatoes. So
right, so they basically made French fries out of the podlings. I guess
it's almost like a lobotomy. Yeah,
yeah, it kind of is. And that scene that you're describing at the end, when Kira is basically strapped to this chair, and you have like crazy Skeksis scientist. Somehow the power of the Dark Crystal could drain their life essence, and then the Skeksis have to drink the life essence to survive, which is, kind of very War of the Worlds too. We're just throwing every single science fiction and fantasy in this podcast. It was still intense, like really intense. 40 years later, I'm like, this is really intense.
And I didn't remember how that scene ended. So also in my head, in addition to them killing the dog, I was like, they're definitely going to kill her here. And Jen's going to be all alone, the last Gelfling, which he thought he was for the most part, but like now he is a real.
Even rewatching this, and I feel like, again, my kids were glued to the screen frame by frame. I mean, they were 100% in. They didn't seem that affected, honestly, by the terror. I was watching it thinking like, oh, as an adult, I don't know or remember whether this works out. I actually don't know who wins. I don't know who survives. Just the knowledge that not everything is going to potentially be okay was really different. I think this is why this movie stands out, because it is just really different. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like 42 going like, is everything going to be okay? Are the Skeksis going to win?
What if they just kill everybody at the end?
What if it's
like,
just
this
a
movie would
genocide?
Talk briefly about the Uru.
The lesser Jedis, as I refer to them, or the lesser Yodas, which is funny because I saw that Agra was played by Frank Oz, who actually did play Yoda in the Star Wars trilogy. So, but yeah, I think of them, they're not I don't even understand can you explain their role for our listeners who probably have no idea what we're talking about?
Before the crystal was broken, there were these creatures, and that when the crystal got broken, each of them got split into two separate creatures, and one of them is like good, but a little bit useless, and
Totally
the
useless.
other ones are bad and committing genocide. So the Uru they kind of look like really, really geriatric dinosaurs to me.
They do. Super geriatric
They're
dinosaurs.
supposed to be good, and they're supposed to be living in harmony, and they're the good half of this split personality. And it took me a little while to pick up on, like, if one of the good Urus die, one of the Skeksis is gonna die at the same time, or if you like cut one of them, the other one also bleeds. And
yeah, that
it wasn't
connection
apparent.
was way over the head of my kids, I think. And I don't, as an adult, it took me even a while to pick that up. Yeah.
Uru, if they're not necessarily balancing out the Skeksis who are the bad, because the bad is so bad, and the Uru are more like a neutral in my mind.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same effect of the light versus dark that you get in some of the other fantasy. I'm just going to go through them because, Lord of the Rings has that. Harry Potter has that. And I mean, I guess Star Wars has that too. Even my daughter turned to me and she's like, oh, are they like the Jedi? I mean, she was picking up on the light versus dark. But you're totally right that it wasn't equal. The dark was so much more powerful.
Yeah. And these Uru dinosaur, slow-moving turtle, geriatric dinosaurs, I don't know. They're kind of just there. I guess it's an interesting thing, but it's not a yin and yang balance. Like, the bad is just really, really bad, and these guys are just sitting around singing Kumbaya or whatever they're doing.
Yeah. So let's get to the bad. I mean, we've gotten to the bad.
All right. Yeah, we've been delaying
Take me to the dark,
talking about the bad guys.
Because I don't want to run up screaming from my office because it's still terrifying.
All right. So we have the Skeksis, which are the bad half of these creatures that were split. They are disgusting looking. I don't know. They're like a bunch of creatures just Frankenstein together. My dog, who does not bark at anything, started barking at the television when these things appeared. So in her head,
they're a little over the top.
This was a threat. You scared my dog, Jim Henson. How dare you? So yeah, they are greedy for power. They seem to have vanity issues, even though they're hideous looking. They're just even the way they eat is disgusting. It's just this sloppy sound. They have just everything about them is just gross, and they're edging each other out for power, and they're the ones who ultimately are committing genocide against all the other creatures in this world, and they're very bad.
And one thing that I still can't get out of my head, it's almost like the screaming of the lamb in Silence of the Lambs, the and the way that they talked, the
high pitched,
yeah, from the moment, the millisecond that first hum, I heard it again, almost 40 years later now, I was instant fear again. It was just so visceral.
Originally, the Skeksis had their own language, the way Kira speaks another language occasionally when she's talking to different creatures. And they tested it with the audiences that these creatures were just making noises and squeaking and like nails on a chalkboard sounds. And the test audience was just like, no, I hate this movie so much. So they redubbed everything that the Skeksis would say and put it into English. Because people were just like, I can't even with this movie.
Yeah.
And once they redubbed it, it does jump out at me occasionally. Like you were saying, oh, we noticed Frank Oz is playing Agra. You definitely hear Frank Oz playing some of these Skeksis.
Oh, yeah,
you hear Jim Henson. Because it does have a hint of oh, that sounds like Ralph the dog from the Muppets. Or oh, that sounds like this piggy when that one talks.
Yeah. Is that Yoda? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's got a touch of familiarity, but with a real just running those fingernails down a chalkboard sound, styrofoam on styrofoam noises, just so creepy.
It was creepy, but it was also hypnotizing. I mean, in the same way, so the geriatric dinosaur creatures, they do this chant, which I guess is like their version of the it's and it's very, just the sound of it for some reason pulls you in. Like I'm hypnotized. I go into the bad, I don't know. I go straight to the, what's it called in Get Out? The bad place? No, wait.
The sunken place.
The sunken place. I immediately went to the sunken place with
You're
the
meditating your way into a sunken place. This
but
whole
like
movie is the
terrifying
sunken
meditation.
place.
Yeah, the whole movie is a sunken place. I might still be there. I'm not sure.
Oh God. That should be the sequel to Get Out. Like you've got a hypnotist who does the little coffee cup trick and you're just permanently stuck in the dark crystal.
Oh my God. Worst nightmare.
Run for your life. Anything could burst through that wall at any second. Oh.
I mean, of the bad guys, I mean, the Skeksis are bad enough. And we haven't even talked about Skeksil, who's sort of a Skeksi, but he loses that battle for
yeah, wait, what did your kids think of that? So like the Skeksis in their leader, Emperor, I think.
Emperor, yeah.
He dies right at the beginning, and one of the Uru dies to go pair and pair with that. It also like disintegrates the second he dies, which I found
horrifying.
Super creepy. Like, okay, we're not just gonna like slowly decompose. We are gonna turn into like melting faces, Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, kind of gross.
I could see why 5-year-old Amanda Treat was like, yeah, fuck no.
Not there's a void of power, and a bunch of the Skeksis are kind of elbowing each other out to be the next emperor, and they challenge each other, which you were saying your kids picked up like the point of the challenge. They're hitting the stones. We get that. But like the second one of them wins, he takes his opponent and they just like pile on him and like
they
rip his clothes to shred, like, and they're even more hideous when they're naked. Like these things
they don't get better. Yeah.
There's no nice side. They don't look good on their right. They don't look good on their left. But yeah, what did your kids think of that? Because I found that kind of disturbing, just the way they turn on each other almost cannibalistically.
Yeah, so I was wondering that too, because I have to say, like, I couldn't remember whether Skeksil, which is the name of the loser of the Emperor battle, and then just so folks know, Skeksil then goes off and tries to be, he sort of interacts with Kira and Jen on their quest, and I kind of felt like he eventually was sort of creep with a white van kind of vibe.
He's trying to double cross, definitely.
Yeah, but I couldn't remember, as you know, which side he, as an adult, even though I'd seen this movie 100 times as a kid, I couldn't remember whether he was ultimately good or not. And I even asked my kids at some point, I'm like, guys, do you think he's a good guy or a bad guy? And they were like, bad guy. They were like, he's a bad guy. Yeah. Even before the end of the movie, where he ultimately, the double cross is sort of revealed. I have to say, as an adult, I wasn't sure of watching it, but my kids were like 100% Skeksil's a creepo.
No, because he's interacting with them and like giving them information. So you're like, oh, that's actually helpful. But then he's immediately like, you should get in my van. I have candy.
Totally.
Like he's trying to lure them back to the fortress and we know nothing good is going to come of that.
Right.
So yeah, your kids have good instincts. They
do, because Skeksil's trying to get back in the good graces of all the rest of the creeps of Skeksis. And yeah, my kids were not buying it. They're like, no, he's a bad guy, 100%. They almost were like, why the hell are you asking me?
Good instincts on those kids.
But all the bad guys, honestly, it's the creepy spiders, crab creatures that were to me the most nightmare of all the bad guys.
Those motherfucking Garthim.
They're
called Garthams, which is like kind of a innocuous sounding name for a creature that like invoked so much terror in my childhood.
Or bad guy spider crabs, also, as my son puts it. That's what he called them.
Yeah. That's a better name, frankly. But yeah, just the way they come bursting through the walls. We've talked about that, but then like they round up the podlings in cages and carry them back to the fortress to be drained. I don't even know what that compares to. Like, there's so many like World War II analogies in my head now that I'm an adult. That it's just like, oh God, why? Like,
They were by
That
far
was
the
so
most
scary.
so scary. They were definitely the most triggering to me watching again as an adult. I was like, these things are still scary. It's not like I'm watching it as an adult going like, oh, they're kind of cheesy or funny. No.
Nope. Well, and they got that they're nonverbal, so it's not like you can bargain with them or like try to
Right.
get in their good graces, anything at all. They just show up, do the job, and it's horrifying.
I don't think my kids were as terrified by them. And I don't know why. Maybe you have to watch it 100 times. Or maybe it's just sort of
Or
the
just
first of its
once.
kind where there's like a
Yeah.
real bad guy. Cause, they've been exposed to like the stormtroopers in Harry Potter who have sometimes faceless villains who are violent. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe this was just the first time we were exposed to that level of like Nazi level crap.
Yeah.
Genocide for kids. It's the first time we were exposed to
The
genocide for
idea
kids.
of like, yeah, rounding up the entire village, taking everyone prisoner, and that they're probably gonna die where they're going. Like that
Right? Or get
is
their essence sucked. Oh my god.
ugh.
But those are the characters. I mean, there's some key scenes we could talk about. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we've talked about it a little bit. The Skeksis taking the essence from the podlings, aka potatoes, is dark. I mean, those were some key scenes in terms of just like the level of the darkness, the chanting. I mean, my body practically went rigid at the chanting and the
Yeah.
hums and the haws. When you think the dog dies, I mean, essentially the ending scene, which is like the climax of the movie, all the characters are in the bad guy castle. You even have the geriatric dinosaurs heading to the castle. And it's honestly a bloodbath. It is just a bloodbath.
Yeah. No, everything that happens in this movie that looks like, oh, we're literally going to kill everybody. I was like, yeah, you know what? Screw this movie. It would do that.
It would do that. And there's like an element of like, wait, are they going to do that? Wait, oh shit, they went there.
Flinging the dog down the like bottomless pit.
What?
Jeez.
I was like, at that point, I was like, oh my God, I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah.
They killed the dog.
They
I'm
killed the
out.
dog. This movie sucks. I was mentioning, I was Googling how they made this movie, but found that epic quote from Frank Oz talking about like Jim Henson's mindset as they were making this movie. And I'm just going to read the direct quote, but I think it sums the whole thing up. What Jim wanted to do, and it was totally his vision, was get back to the darkness of the original grim fairy tales. He thought it was fine to scare children. He didn't think it was healthy for children to always feel safe. And boom, he did it.
Boom.
Mission accomplished. Well done, Jim.
That's sort of a mic drop quote, honestly. And I'll say it again. What the fuck, Jim Henson? Obviously it's a perfect quote for what I think this movie is and what we've been talking about. But my kids love this shit. They love it. They love it with capital letters and the darkness and the scary things. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what the fuck, Jim Henson? But you're right, because kids do like this. They don't always respond to always feeling safe. They actually really respond to the on the edge of your seat. Are they going to kill everybody? Who is, what's going on here? There's a quest and da 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 da, and they have to save the world, and they are in, even if there's like plot holes on top of plot holes. And I honestly can't think of a modern day movie that elicits that kind of fear in kids, or I can't think of one.
Yeah.
Maybe I haven't watched one yet with my kids, but I actually think that's what keeps their attention in a way. Like the same way, like similar to Never Ending Story, which is also from this era. I mean, it is an edge of your seat for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into this story, and I think that the not feeling safe has something to do with that.
So I wonder, because we were expecting the worst of this movie, but it does wrap up and everything has a happy ending. Sort of. They might have killed Agra. We're not sure. But if
Agra
it had been
Yoda.
If it had been left as a movie where it was like, yeah, you know what? The dog died, a bunch of people died, like life is unfair sometimes, and that was the way this movie ended, do you think your kids would have been able to handle that or responded the same way?
That's a good question. I don't know. Probably not. Probably not. But yeah, I mean, I guess there are examples where key characters die in kids' books and like modern day kid books and movies. But yeah, I think if it ended at the bloodbath and I was like, oh my God, everyone is going to die, maybe they would have assumed a sequel happened, but they probably wouldn't have been okay with it. Yeah.
See, I'm wondering if my mindset when I was 5 was influenced by like my parents didn't expose me to a lot, but when they did, if it was something dark and I freaked out, they would just pull me out of there and there would be no resolution. Like I
Oh,
remember
okay. We're
Disney
going deep
re-released
here.
Oh yeah, Disney re-released Snow White when we were kids in the
Oh yeah, I
theaters.
remember that. Yeah.
And I remember going to it, not really knowing the story very well. And so we get to the point where the witch gives her the apple, she bites it, and it looks like she dies. And they put her in a coffin, and then they're chasing the witch up the hill, and she's about to like throw a boulder down on the dwarves. And I just lost it, and they pulled me out of there. So, like, as far as I knew, Snow White was still dead. And
Snow
the
White
witch
died.
killed all the dwarfs. The
Oh
end.
my God. Genocide. Dwarf genocide.
Yeah, no. So like I remember that experience. But yeah, like there was a bunch of unresolved things in my childhood. And I want to say, like, I can't remember if I finished this movie.
It was okay to feel unsafe per Jim Henson, but you never got back to safety.
Yeah, no, as far as I know, they still have the shard and they're still running in the dark.
Being chased by the evil spider crab things. The garthim. Fuck those garthim.
Horrible things are coming for them at any given moment. And that was the movie, the end.
Yeah. All right. So what was new, or was there anything new as an adult watching this movie? I mean, we've covered some of this ground, but
yeah,
I think you would ask this question, you know, what's new, what's cringy?
I did appreciate the art of it. Like it's beautifully crafted. The puppet, Muppet, not Muppet things look amazing. Like all the different versions of them, the costumes they're wearing are super cool. The spaces they're in look really just creative. Like they meet Agra and she's holding her eyeball in her hand, but like there's those plants that grab Jen and are kind of holding them up in the air and she starts talking to them and they like slowly release them. Just stuff like that where it was like, oh, I didn't see that coming. So like there's just a lot of really cool stuff going on all around them. And I really like that. I did not have any memory of that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I remember the basic texture of it, but I agree with you as an adult. That really stuck out at me. I mean, we talked about at the beginning that the craftsmanship of it is still really good. And it's not only still really good, but it still pulls you in. And especially even kids today, it definitely pulled my kids in. They were in, and I think part of the craftsmanship had something to do with that.
One thing I didn't love about this, the amount of explaining that's going on. Like there's a narrator at the beginning and the narration just keeps going and going going.
No idea. I still don't know what the hell they were talking about.
And then like there's various characters that just keep explaining and explaining things that have happened before the movie started. And oh, you have to do X to get to Y. And the exposition just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like there was too much explaining and not enough. I don't know, that cliche show don't tell that you get when you're like an elementary school kid learning how to write. There was a lot of just telling you like, this is the thing.
Right.
We're not seeing any action here. I don't want to call it lazy storytelling because there's so much creative stuff going on. But in terms of the quest, that did feel a little lazy to me.
I mean, it was thin. I mean, I think that we keep talking about this. We keep trying to have an analogy to Lord of the Rings or something else that honestly is much better with that. Yeah. I mean, no, that's a book, but yeah, I agree that the story is super thin. The narration is confusing. And like I said, my kids were explaining the plot to me, but really it was because a lot of those details didn't really matter to them. I mean, I think that's what I picked up on as an adult, where I observed that I was thinking the same thing. I was like, this is kind of lazy. And like, what are they talking about? But my kids didn't care. I mean, there were enough markers there to guide them to know that it was a quest, to know that who was good and who was bad. I sort of observed that now as an adult, that you didn't really need it, but it definitely took away from my enjoyment watching it again.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I'd say that I noticed was the Agra, who I didn't really remember that much. To me, she was just sort of like a putsy old lady. And I guess like as a middle-aged lady myself, I sort of kind of liked her. I thought she was a little badass. She tells off the Skeksis at some point. And
she's sassy. I like that.
Yeah. So she had her moments that made her fun to watch again.
I don't think there was anything else that like overly surprised me. Like, I was bracing myself to rewatch this because I just had such bad childhood memories of what turned out to be the Garthim. There was something in this movie that in my childhood imagination was like the most enormous threat ever. And now watching it again, it was like, oh yeah, they just come bowling ball through the wall and round everyone up and take them to be killed. Like, yeah, that's actually scary. I feel justified in having nightmares about that.
Your 5-year-old self was like
My
vindicated.
5-year-old self had good instincts.
Yeah.
Like, that's scary.
I guess what was new to me is that sometimes when you watch these older movies again, they don't, you don't, obviously you're like, oh, that's kind of like silly that I was scared of this. No, not so with this. Not so. This is still fucked up scary.
It is. It really is.
I actually would encourage, like, if people are listening to this and haven't rewatched it, I mean, on some level, it's worth a rewatch just to see if you have the same visceral reaction that we clearly did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So at this point, we'll move on to the scoring. So we're going to score it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being garbage, 10 being Princess Bride. We're going to score it 2 different ways. So we'll score it whether it lives up to us as adults. Then we'll score whether it lives up to kids today or its intended audience. And then we'll give a final yay or nay of whether it lives up, and we both have to agree. With that in mind, let's start with whether it lives up to us as an adult. Like, scale of 1 to 10. Treat, you want to go? I don't know if you want to go first.
I was like in my mind rattling around like, what am I going to vote for this one for like a few days here? Because in terms of the level of intensity and fear that it invoked, and again, we're building off of my childhood trauma that this movie caused, I think it lived up to my memory of it being terrifying. The part I don't think holds up as well is what we were talking about with them over explaining and giving all this narrative and exposition, that the plot and the story didn't live up for me. So with that in mind, for adults, and I realize there might be people listening who have such strong feelings about this movie.
Sort of like Rudolph.
Yeah. I think I want to give it a 6 for adults.
6 for adults. You bring up a good point that as an adult, it still elicits the same reaction. So I had initially, I think you might have bumped me up a bit because I was going lower, as I typically do, because, as an adult, I mean, there were many times where I'm just like, is this movie over yet? How long is it? It's just not as good as some other Quest movies. I was going low as a 3. I gave it a point for the really, really amazing effects and production, a point for brevity. And initially I gave it just 1 point for triggering memories, but I do think it's worth 2 because I think I think I'm going to go up to a 4. Okay. And it's for some of the reasons you're talking about. It wasn't cheesy. It was still as intended, as Jim Henson intended. It was still dark. It was still unsafe. So, but just missed the mark to me for like a good movie. So I think it didn't just miss the mark. I think it was well wide of that mark. Okay. The plot was just a little painful. So I gave it a 4. So this is like, I think going to get interesting for kids. So
yeah. So from my point of view, I was ready to go really low for kids. I feel like,
and we should clarify this category of whether it lives up for kids. It's kids or intended audience. And I think we could solidly say this was a kid target. Yeah. So, yes. Does it live up to kids today?
But not a 3 to 5-year-old at all.
I mean, maybe.
I'm a little bit swayed by you describing your kids' reaction to it and that they were really engrossed. Yeah. I wouldn't have expected that, frankly. But shows that I know.
Group of 2.
So I'm going to give it a 5. I'm going for neutral.
Just neutral 5.
Just neutral. Like, it's not good. It's not bad. It's kind of useless. Like the
I think a 5
dinosaur guys.
Yeah. I think a 5 is really fair. I mean, this is a unique place where I go a little bit higher. So I was surprised too how engrossed my kids were, but I'm not super surprised. I mean, they do like Never Ending Story. They have liked some of these that have really simple plots. The quest narrative just kind of works for kids. Maybe not for Rudolph, everybody. Sorry. So I went as high as a 7, and I
Whoa,
went as high as a
hey.
7. I think this is my highest for kids because my own kids were so engrossed, and I think it also hit the marks of a quest. Points off for just sort of being a confusing plot, and points off for it not being for being lesser than some of those other quest movies. I mean, there are better ones. So it is lesser than that, but I wouldn't put it outside the realm of possibility that my kids might want to watch it again. I don't potentially.
Yeah.
So I gave it a 7 because I don't think it's great, but it's certainly, hey, parents out there, you could sit your kids in front of this and feel like, sure, they might get a little scared, but maybe not. Maybe they're desensitized and it's fine. So I think they'll like it. So yeah, so I went a bit higher
All
there.
right.
So I think that's a 10 overall adult rating that we did.
It is.
And a 12 kid rating, which might be the highest kid rating we've given. I think it's close to Addams Family.
Addams
Is
Family,
also a
we
12. So that's a
recommended.
total of 22, which isn't terrible. It's not the top. It's right in the middle, I think. But
big question.
Big question. Does it live up? Convince me, Amanda. One way or the other.
I don't know which way to convince you because I'm also really on the fence about this.
You're on the fence. Well, I sort of made a case for, and the ultimate question is, if it lives up, you're going to want to watch it again. I feel like that's a solid no for me in terms of whether I want to watch it again. However, is that I think it's a fun exercise to watch it again just to see whether it scares the shit out of you again. And the fact that it kind of still does, and it's still just as good with the scary shit. And another case for it is that kids, I do think it still resonates with kids today. So I think that's it's both triggering for adults and delightful for kids, I think, at this point, even if it's about genocide. So I think that's the case for, and I think the ultimate case against is that it was like slightly painful to sit through again because the plot is just watered down.
Yeah,
I think so. It's a tough one. Those are my cases for and against.
I don't want to watch this again. But when we were talking earlier about, I don't remember what this movie was about, but I remember how it made me feel. The way it made me feel watching it again as an adult lived up to the way I remember it making me feel as a kid. Like, I think if this movie came out today, it would still have that level of creepy terror that it did when it first came out. Like you said earlier, there's really nothing like it today.
It's one of those where I would encourage everyone out there to just rewatch it once, but it's not something you really want to go back to over and over again. So I don't know. It says something though that both of us are, no, I don't want to watch this again. Yeah. But there were some elements that were sort of interesting that it sort of elicited the same emotions as when we were 5.
Can we give it like it lives up with an asterisk, like only watch it once?
I don't know, but so part of me feels like maybe it doesn't live up with an asterisk. It's just really watered down. It's hard to get around the fact that I think there are better versions of this idea. They're maybe not as well crafted and maybe not as, in terms of the effects, and maybe not as, doesn't elicit the same visceral fight or flight.
Yeah.
But there's better stories out there.
It's in the same bucket as Avatar in my head, that there's some fascinating things going on here, but the story's not that great.
I'm going to have to tip myself to it doesn't live up. I mean, you could still go the opposite.
I'll balance it out. We'll give it 50-50. It lives up and it doesn't live up.
All right. So, and I'll just say for me, the final nail in the coffin for having it not live up is that it's just not that enjoyable as an adult to watch it again. Asterisk. I think it's a fun exercise. And for those who have kids at any age, it would be an interesting exercise to have them watch it and see how engrossed they get. But good God, if my kids ask to watch it again, I am not going to rewatch this. No way.
No.
I'm going to say, like, sort of with some hesitancy, that it doesn't live up.
Okay.
But are you going opposite?
I'm going to say it lives up only because you already took one for the team and said that it didn't. This way we can say, well, it kind of does, kind of doesn't.
Yeah, I think this will.
But ultimately, yeah.
Yeah, but I'd love to hear from listeners. Are you just as on the fence as us? Do you think it solidly lives up? Do you think it doesn't? Are you going to go run and rent it right away? Let us know what you think, whether you agree with us, where you could let us know at Live Up Pod on all the socials, except for the Tickety Talk. Haven't done that yet. Although I have to admit, I did put a video on on the Tickety Talk of one of our clips.
I love that you're still doing the old lady tickety talk.
Yeah.
Here. We talked about this last episode. Jess sits in her front porch in a rocking chair with a shotgun and yells about kids doing tickety talk dances on her lawn.
Get your tickety talk.
Take that tickety talk dance off my lawn.
Yeah, so I put it on not like a Live Up Pod account, but people watched it. But
okay.
So yes, we're at Live Up Pod at Gmail, as well as all the socials except for the Tickety Talk. Insert grandma emoji there. Thanks for listening, everyone. Till next time.